and 4.
Yeah.
Your son comes in saying he wants to transition. What do you do?
Well, first, it's my son, so I love him regardless, right? And he's always going to have my undying love. That's me, right? I want to make sure that I'm involved in understanding where he is, how he's feeling, the way he's feeling, why he thinks it's important. If this is a journey that he wants to go down, I want him to always be comfortable in his own skin. And I want him to always know that he has a partner in me to help him along that journey.
Would you advise him to wait till he's 18?
If this is how he is feeling and I feel like I'm closely tied to him, I'm not going to advise him on something that he feels is
at 14
right.
years old, Wes?
No, I understand it. But what I'm saying is the most important thing for me is I want him to feel safe in his own skin, safe in his own decision-making, but also know that at 14 years old, I want to be involved inside of that process as well. I'm not going to condemn him nor castigate him. I'm not going to kick him out of the house. I'm not going to do anything that's going to hurt him.
Yeah. So
but I just want to make sure that I'm involved.
I fully believe, by the way, just my crew came in here, okay? And I was coming from the other building. I came on this side. They said, Pat, I got to tell you something. What's that? I like him a lot. That's all they're telling me. I freaking like this guy a lot. Right there, he's looking, waving, going like this. I got, look at these guys. I like him a lot. I don't know. I like him a lot. So something tells me, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it would happen to your son because of the way you've raised him. So that I don't even think that's a thought that you have. But maybe let me rephrase the question on what some people have a hard time with.
Yeah.
Okay. So I used to live in Glendale, California. I went to Glendale High School. So I lived in California most of my life. If you ask me what freeways I know on the back of my hand, it's anything in LA I know, all of them. 4052, 170, 134, 145, you name them, I know them. Okay. If all of a sudden you've raised your kids in a certain way, and say you put them in a Christian private school till 5th grade, your son has never brought anything up. In 5th grade, your wife gets fired. And you were relying on that $72,000 a year income that she had. She hasn't found a job to replace that income. You guys talk and you say, babe, I think we got to do public school. You put your kids in public school, and all of a sudden you notice 6 months, 12 months later, your son is behaving in a weird way. And then he has support with a teacher. They build a relationship. And then you find out that the teacher, maybe as part of the LGBTQ community, is encouraging your son, who's never, since he was in 5th grade, ever brought this up. Now, because of a couple friends and a teacher, he is thinking about taking puberty blockers to go through the transition. As a parent, how informed would you like to be when that teacher is talking to your kid and is persuading them? And what position would you have to say, wait a minute, I've never seen any signs like this. Why are you going through it right now? Would you then say, son, if you do want to get on puberty blockers and transition under the age of 18, I'll support you? Or would you say, no, we got to kind of get to the bottom of this?
Well, first, I don't care whether we're talking about puberty blockers or whether we're talking about what type of math you're learning. I want to be involved. You know what I mean? Like, I'm an involved parent.
A sitting governor, a father of two, sits down on one of the biggest podcasts in the country and gets asked one of the simplest questions a dad can face. Your son comes in and says he wants to transition. What do you do? That's it. No trick, no legal trap, just a parenting question, man to man, dad to dad. And he couldn't answer it. Not because he didn't have time to think, not because the question was unclear. He couldn't answer it because the political version of him and the father version of him were pulling in two completely different directions at the same time, live on camera, and that tells you everything. And when you look at what was said and what wasn't said, you need to understand who Westmore actually is, because the background makes this moment hit completely different. Westmore is the governor of Maryland. He's the first black governor in Maryland's entire history. He served as a captain in the U.S. Army, deployed to Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne Division, earned the Bronze Star, and spent years working as a White House fellow under Condoleezza Rice. He went to Johns Hopkins University, worked as an investment banker in New York, and wrote a book called The Other Westmore that became a national bestseller. He is Southern Baptist, openly faith driven, and describes himself as a family man first. He has a 12-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter. This is not a guy who lacks life experience. This is not a guy who hasn't been in hard rooms, made hard decisions, or felt pressured that most people will never understand. And in the interview itself, it wasn't hostile. Patrick Bet-David, the host of PBD podcast, was warm and complimentary toward Moore throughout the entire conversation. He told Moore his people loved him, as you guys heard. And he mentioned that Stephen A. Smith talks about him constantly, brought up Ray Lewis, vouching for him personally. PBD told Moore on camera that he genuinely believes Moore could be a serious 2028 presidential contender. This wasn't an ambush. It wasn't a gotcha setup designed to embarrass him. PBD even framed the parenting question by saying, "We are both parents," before asking it. He was coming at it like a fellow dad, having a real conversation, not like a political opponent trying to score points. So when you pull all that together, the military background, the faith, the family, the reputation for decisive leadership, the friendly interview environment, the answer Moore gave becomes even more striking, because here's a man whose entire public identity is built on a military principle he mentioned himself in this very interview: leave no one behind. He said it with conviction. He said when he first joined the Army at 17, you guys could go watch the rest of, the interview. I just wanted to play that specific segment, and then I'm just talking to you, having a conversation with you guys. But he said when he first joined the Army at 17, that concept became the foundation of how he sees the world. You start with 10, you finish with 10. Everybody matters. Nobody gets left behind. Nobody gets left behind. That's the brand. That's the identity. That's what every speech, every endorsement, every campaign stop has been built on. And then Patrick Bet-David asked him a direct question about his own son, and he left the question behind. Not because he's a bad father, not because he doesn't love his kids, but because the moment you become a politician with national ambitions, even the most personal questions stop being personal. They become calculations. And that gap between who Westmore say he is and what Westmore actually said in that moment, that's what this whole conversation is really about. And when Patrick Bet-David looked at Governor Moore and asked him directly, "Your son comes in saying he wants to transition, what do you do?" That's the whole question. 7 words that every parent can understand immediately. No legal jargon, no policy framework, no academic language required. Just a dad asking another dad what he would do in his own house with his own child. And Moore's first response was, "If it's my son, I love him regardless. He's always going to have my undying love. And I want to make sure I'm involved in understanding where he is, how he's feeling, why he thinks is important. And I want him to always be comfortable in his own skin and know that he has a partner in me." Now read that back slowly. There is not a single decision in any of those sentences. There is not one action item. There is warmth, there is love, there is language about partnership and comfort. And none of it answers what Patrick Bet-David actually asked. Patrick Bet-David noticed it immediately. He pushed and asked a more specific version of the same question. Would you advise him to wait until he's 18? That's even simpler. That's a yes or no. And Moore's answer was, if this is how he is feeling and I feel like I'm closely tied to him, I'm not going to advise him on something that he feels is. And then he trailed off into talking about wanting his son to feel safe and wanting to be involved in the process. He said he wouldn't condemn him, wouldn't kick him out, wouldn't do anything to hurt him. All of that is fine. All of that is reasonable. But not one single word of it is an answer to the question of what he would actually do. Think about it this way. Imagine your best friend calls you up and says their kid came home with straight F's on the report card. And they ask you, what would you do if that was your kid? And you say, I love my child unconditionally. I want them to feel supported, and I want them to be involved in their academic. I want to be involved in their academic journey. Right? So you would say, I'm going to say it again for the people in the back. I love my child unconditionally. I want them to feel supported, and I want them to be involved in their academic journey. your friend will hang up the phone because that's not an answer. That's a feeling dressed up as a response, and feelings are real and feelings matter. But when your kid is standing in front of you on a waiting decision, or in front of you waiting on a decision, a feeling is not a plan. Parents don't get to feel their way through every hard call. At some point, you have to actually do something. You have to draw a line somewhere or say yes to something or say not yet to something. That's the job. Here's the pattern that matters. Every time Patrick McDavid asked a question that required a position, Moore's answer shifted toward process. Not what he would do, but how involved he would be in the process of figuring out what to do. There's a real difference between those two things. Being involved is not the same as leading. A parent who attends every meeting, asks every question, sits in every conversation, but never actually makes a call. That parent is present, but they're not in charge. Kids need both. They need to feel heard, and they need to know that someone older, someone with more life experience, someone who loves them is actually steering the ship. Involvement without a position is just observation with good intentions. What's wild is Moore himself said during the same interview that he doesn't take talking points from party bosses, that he asks whether something makes sense rather than just following the party line. He said it with conviction. But the moment a question got personal enough to actually cost him something politically, the talking points showed up right on schedule. Patrick McDavid didn't stop at the first question. He gave Moore a second chance, and this time he made it even more concrete, as you guys heard. He laid out a real life scenario that millions of American families, have actually lived through. He said, imagine you raise your kids in a Christian private school. Your son never brought anything like this up. You never showed any signs, nothing. But then your wife loses her job. The $72,000 income disappears, and you and your spouse sit down and agree you have to move the kids to public school because you simply can't afford the alternative anymore. 6 months go by, a year go by, and you start noticing your son behaving differently. You find out he's building a close relationship with a teacher who is part of the LGBTQ community, quote unquote. That's what Patrick McDavid said, as you guys heard. And that teacher has been encouraging your son, a kid who never brought any of this up before, to consider puberty blockers as part of a transition. Patrick McDavid then asked more directly, as a parent, how involved do you want to be in that? Would you say wait, or would you support it? That scenario is not a Fox News talking point. That is a real situation happening in real households across this country right now, and it crosses every political line. It doesn't care if you are a Democrat, Republican, or independent. It doesn't care what state you live in or what church you attend. It's a parenting situation, full stop. And the reason Patrick McDavid made it that specific, the private school, the financial pressure, the teacher's influence, the timeline, is because he was removing every excuse to be vague. He was saying, here's the full picture. Now tell me what you do. Moore's answer, I want to be involved in everything. Whether we're talking about puberty blockers or what type of math you're learning, I want to be involved. I think anything that happens in a school should be a joint process between teachers and parents always, and teachers can't keep secrets from parents. He said he thinks parents have to be involved. And again, all of that is correct. None of it is wrong. But none of it is an answer to the specific question Patrick McDavid asked either. Being involved and making a decision are two completely different things. And Moore kept treating them like they're the same. Here's the historical reality that matters. In 1925, the Supreme Court ruled in Pierce versus Society of Sisters that parents have a constitutional right to direct the education and upbringing of their child. That case came about because Oregon had passed a law requiring all kids to attend public school, essentially cutting parents out of the decision entirely. The court struck it down and said, no, the state does not get to override the parent when it comes to how a child is raised. That principle has been foundational in American law for 100 years. The idea that parents are the primary decision makers in a child's life is not a conservative idea or a liberal idea.
Well, first, I don't care whether we're talking about puberty blockers or whether we're talking about what type of math you're learning. I want to be involved. You know what I mean? Like I'm an involved parent. My wife is an involved parent. And I just think it's very important for parents to be involved in everything. that happens with their child. And that's why I think that anything that happens in a school should be a joint process between the teachers and the parents, always. And no matter what.
So parents should know what's happening. Teachers can't keep a secret away from parents and not informing them what conversations they're having.
I think parents have to be involved.
I know, but I'm saying there's a lot of parents that maybe don't have the luxuries that you and I have, who don't make the money that maybe we make. And you've done well for yourself. You're taking care of your finances over the years. You were in the military. You give me the vibe of somebody that's made good decisions. You were an investment banker. You've done well for yourself.
Yeah.
But some of the people that don't have that luxury, here's what I think is going to happen. The reason why I'm asking this question, when I talk to Stephen A's like, nope, full stop. I got a daughter. Men, no, not going to happen. Yeah. I think 2028 election is going to be the most free agency election. And I actually think whatever Kalshi's got you right now is not the right number. I think if anybody's a betting man right now and is willing to put a little bit on Kalshi to say, hey, who I think has a potential of doing something that could have a plus minus, I would support, if you got, like you go to Kentucky Derby, I like to go to Kentucky Derby a lot, and you'll have 3 horses on a final race. If you want to vote and support somebody on the Democratic ticket, I think I would put you as a long shot, because I don't think it's a long shot. I really don't. I really believe in your abilities to go through this next phase. Charming, likable, military background. You flirted with being a Republican back in the days. Condoleezza Rice. Maybe you were a Republican back in the days, and whether you want to talk about that or not, the market kind of sees that you were, so it's out there, so it's good for that district you were talking about, 77%. But I do believe if you want the independent votes and that position is a little bit vanilla, I think it'll backfire versus it being black and white, because I do think independents are willing to support a guy like you, but that's an area that just loses husband and wives. Mom and dads are like, dude, come on, guys, just give me a real answer.
No, but honestly, it is my real answer to say that I think we always have to make sure that parents have involvement in this, that parents have a say in this. These things cannot be decided without any form of adult. With any form.
But if a parent wants to go through it, and puberty blockers are available, you're saying it's okay for parents to try to give the kids puberty blockers as long as parents approve it. That decision becomes on the parents.
Listen, I think that it's not a choice that I would make.
It's not a choice that you would make.
Okay. It's not a choice that I would make. I think that it is a very personal decision between these families, and honestly, for the kids that are going through this, I mean, honestly, my heart breaks for them, because that is a weight, and something that's become so politicized that I just think is so deeply unfair to that child.
I agree.
I
agree.
But I think this is something that this is a decision that the child cannot make on their own.
When you were in when you were in high school, do you remember how many gay friends you had in high school? Do you remember how many gay guys were in high school that we knew about publicly, openly? Because I remember myself. I was in a school with 4,000 kids.
That's a good question. It's interesting.
I don't say their names. I don't want you to say.
No,
Mary Jackson was a,
No,
just saying.
but it's interesting.
Yeah.
When I went to military school, because I got sent to military school when I was young, that was an offense that could get you kicked out of school.
I remember that.
So, because remember,
Don't Ask, Don't
that was pre when I first went. I think Don't Ask, Don't Tell was passed a few years after I started military school.
So, with that being said, family, I gave you the history of how that happened in Oregon, where basically the schools were cutting parents out of the decision entirely, and the court struck it down and said no, and the state does not get to override when it comes to how a child is raised. Override the parent. The state can't do that. That principle has been, like I said, American law for 100 years. But the idea that parents are the primary decision makers in a child's life is not a conservative or liberal idea. It's a bedrock American idea that both sides have used when it suits them. So when Moore says parents need to be involved, he's saying something that literally no one disagrees with. The question was never whether parents should be involved. The question was what a parent should actually do once they are involved, and the situation in front of them looks like what Patrick McDavid described. Being in the room is not the same as leading the room. There's a reason coaches, right? There's a reason coaches don't just watch the game. They call the plays. There's a reason a doctor doesn't just sit with you and say, I want to be part of your health journey. They give you a diagnosis and a recommendation. The presence of a presence of a parent matters enormously. But the guidance that parent provides is what actually shapes the child's direction. Let's actually be honest about what's actually happening here. Because Moore doesn't deserve to be treated like he's uniquely broken or cowardly. He's not. What you watch in that moment is something that happens to be almost every politician who reaches a certain level of national ambition, and it has nothing to do with who they are as a person. It has everything to do with the system they're operating inside. Moore is polling for a 2028 presidential run. He needs progressive voters who see any hesitation or transition or who let me backtrack. He needs progressive voters who see any hesitation on transgender issues as a form of abandonment. He also needs independent voters and persuadable moderates who want straight answers and common sense. A direct answer on a specific question cuts him with one group or the other, no matter what he says. So the calculation, whether it's cautious or not, becomes say nothing specific enough to be used against you, wrap it in the language of love and involvement, and move on. That's not a Westmore problem. That's a modern politics problem. That's a quote from Robert F. Kennedy that has stuck around for decades because it keeps being true. He said, moral courage is rarer than bravery in battle. Think about what that actually means. RFK was talking about physical combat, about men running into gunfire, and he said, the hardest thing isn't that. The hardest thing is standing in a room and saying something true when you know it's going to cost you. That kind of courage doesn't show up on a resume. It shows up in moments exactly like the one on Patrick McDavid's podcast. And the absence of it shows up in the same place. Patrick McDavid actually flagged it live right there on camera. He told Moore directly, that position is a little bit vanilla. I think it'll backfire. And he explained why. Because independent voters, the ones Moore absolutely needs to win the national election, are sitting at home watching this and feeling like they're not getting a real person. They're getting a press release. Patrick McDavid wasn't being cruel. He was being a realist. And he was doing more a favor by saying it out loud instead of just thinking it. Even people who genuinely like Moore, who wants to see him succeed, could see the gap between the man and the answer he gave. Here's what makes this particularly striking when you zoom out. The medical system has a standard. When you go to a doctor with systems, they don't say, I want to be involved in understanding your health journey. They give you a diagnosis, they give you options, and they give you a recommendation based on their expertise. That's not arrogance. That's the job you hired them to do. The legal system works the same way. Your lawyer doesn't sit across from you and say, I want to be a partner in your legal situation. They tell you what the law says, what your options are, and what they think you should do. We hold professionals accountable to the standard because we understand that expertise without guidance is useless to the person sitting across the table. Leadership works the same way. A governor asking people to trust him with a state or eventually a country has to be willing to give a real answer when a real question lands in front of him. Not a perfect answer, not an answer everyone agrees with, just a real one. What makes the leave no one behind principle Moore loves to quote so powerful in the military is that it requires a decision in the hardest possible moment. You don't wait to feel comfortable, you move. The transcript shows us a man who, at the moment the question got personal enough to matter, chose to wait. Here's where this stops being about Westmore and starts being about every parent watching this video right now. Because the broader pattern isn't just one politician dodging one question on one podcast. It's what happens to the national conversation when political language becomes the default way we talk about parenting decisions. When leaders consistently replace direct answers with diplomatic frameworks, everyday families lose the public reference points that used to help them feel less alone in hard moments. And these moments are getting harder and more frequent. Patrick McDavid cited some generational data during the interview that's worth sitting with, regardless of where you stand politically. The silent generation had about 1% identifying as LGBTQ. Baby boomers were around 2.6%. Gen X moved to about 4%. Millennials hit 10%. Millennials hit 10%. Gen Z is now 20.8%. And projections for the next generation are tracking toward 41.6%. Now, you don't have to have a political opinion about those numbers to recognize what they mean at the kitchen table level. They mean that right now in homes across America, parents are having conversations they were never prepared for, with kids who are navigating something the culture is still figuring out in real time. That's not a Republican problem or a Democratic problem. That's a parenting reality that millions of families are living inside of right now today. Every generation of American parents has faced a version of this, a moment where the world outside the front door moved faster than their ability to process it. Think about the 1950s parents watching their kids get swept up in rock and roll and integration and rapidly changing social landscape, right? Think about how parents in the 1960s and 1970s watching counterculture rewrite almost every social rule their generation had lived by. Think about the parents in the 1990s watching the internet arrive. So I'm going to go over it again. 1950s, parents watching their kids get swept up in rock and roll and integration. Rapidly changing social landscape. 1960s and 1970s, counterculture rewrite almost every social rule their generation had lived by. 1990s, internet arrived and realizing they had no playbook for what their kids were now exposed to. In every single one of those moments, the parents who came out on the other side with their families intact weren't the ones who had no opinion. They were the ones who stayed engaged, asking real questions, made imperfect decisions, and kept showing up. Having no position is not a neutral choice. It's a choice to let the current take your kid wherever it goes. What Moore actually said that was worth keeping, and this is important because this isn't about tearing him down, is that parents need to be involved. That teachers can't keep secrets from parents, and that decisions this significant shouldn't happen without adult guidance. That's real. That matters. But he buried those points under so much careful diplomatic packaging that the core message got completely lost in the wrapping. And that's the standard we should hold leaders to. Not that they agree with us, not that they get everything right, but that when a direct question lands in front of them, they give us something real to work with, a real answer. Even an imperfect one is something you can respond to, build on, or push back against. A non-answer leaves everyone exactly where they started. What happened on this podcast here wasn't a political failure. It was a clarity failure. And every parent who watched it felt it, not because of what Moore believes, but because of what he couldn't bring himself to say out loud, right? So I'm going to leave it there, family, because like I said, what every parent who watched it felt, not because of what Moore believes, but because of what he couldn't bring himself to say out loud. Drop your honest take in the comments. Would you have answered that differently as a parent? Subscribe if you want more breakdowns that skip through the political packaging and get straight to what actually matters for real people. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. Let the love supersede the hate. As always, we just having a productive conversation and diving into the deeper things rather than just the words, right? So I'm going to leave it there, family. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.